Hello, welcome to project number 1 in our Intro to C Programming course. So, what this is going to be is I am going to go through as slow as I can, and I'm going to show a solution to the problem in the first project. Hopefully, by the time you're watching this, you will have done it yourself and will have gotten it working as best as you can. If you haven't done that, no worries, we'll run through it together. And the source code for this will be available on the site for you to read yourself. If you have already done it, then what you can do is you can compare your source code to mine, see if we did anything differently, and if we did, see if you can figure out why that is. My code isn't necessarily better than yours, it might just be different. And as long as it works and does so in an efficient manner, the small differences really don't matter, do they? Before I get started here, let's determine what the problem we're doing is. So, I've written 3 steps up here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get input from the user in the form of an integer. Check if the int we get is positive or negative, and print out a message according to the results. I've also done one more thing to get prepared. I have our entry point function, int main, that takes void and returns 0. This is the only function that is necessary in every C program, because what the compiler will do is when it compiles our file, it will look for a function named void, or named main, and if it finds one, it's going to say, okay, I'm going to start the program there. If it doesn't find one, it's going to get very confused and then be sad. And, put errors at us too. That's kind of important. So, let's get started here. What are we going to do? We don't have any files included here, so we don't have access to any standard library functions. So let's get started with that. We're going to need printf, and we're going to need scanf. So, pound include, so this is telling the preprocessor that the file that I'm going to give it next, so stdio.h, this include tells the preprocessor that it's going to find this file and copy paste it into my source code file, starting at this line right here. Next up, we're going to need one more thing, I think. No, actually, I think this will be it. Let's see, I may have been thinking of a different solution to this problem. So, let's see what we got here. First thing we're going to do is we need to ask the user for input, so let's do that by giving them a message. Printf, printf. And what printf does is we will give it a format string, is what it's called. So we're going to say input an integer. Do the /n there. And so, printf expects a format string, or a constant character pointer, or just a string. So in C, we surround string literals, that is, things that are not meant to be interpreted as code, but just meant to be interpreted as this particular string of letters and characters. We surround those in double quotes. Here, we're just asking the user to input an integer and have a /n at the end. What that is it's called a new line character. And what that will do is when we do this, when we run this on the terminal, instead of just continuing this line afterward, it is going to start a whole new line. That was wrong. It'll start a whole new line for the user to start typing on. So now we've got that. Next up, we're going to be getting the integer from the user. So we'll scanf, scanf. Scanf can be thought of as kind of the opposite of printf, in that instead of giving scanf a format string to output, you give it a format string of what kind of input it needs to look for from the keyboard. So we're going to be doing that here. We have another string here, but instead of having anything that's human readable, we're just going to have a % and then a lowercase d here. And what that does is it tells scanf to look for a decimal number or an integer. next thing scanf expects is somewhere to store the data it gets. We don't have that yet, so let's go up a couple lines, and let's do that. Let's call it int input 0. We're initializing this because if the user fails to input something that we expect them to, we'll just default to 0. And now we need to tell scanf that it can store its results in input. So how do we do that? We're going to pass a pointer to input. So we're going to use the address of operator here, input. And so what this will do is it will give the location that input represents in memory to scanf. And what scanf will do is it will scan the line we type in on the keyboard for an integer to put in. And if it finds one, which we're assuming it will put that integer into the memory that input represents. So now that we've got that, let's keep going. Next up, we need to determine if the integer we get is positive or negative. So we're going to do that using two comparisons and a few if-else blocks. So here's what we do. Say if, and what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if input is less than 0. So if input less than 0, have our curly braces here for the actual result of the statement. And so what this is doing is if the number loaded into input right now is less than 0, then this whole expression will evaluate to the number 1. As we know, with Boolean expressions, 0 is false, and 1 or anything that isn't a 0 is true. So if we get a true here, we execute all of the code in here. But what if input is greater than 0 or equal to 0? Well then, else if input greater than 0. And now we have that situation covered. And if input is not less than 0 and it's not greater than 0, we don't need a third check. At this point, we know it's 0. So, last we just need an else. And now we're going to fill in these blanks we left here. So what do we do if the input is less than 0? Well, we'll just tell the user that much. Printf %d, it's less, it's negative. And then I need the input. Yep, there we go. So just to go into excruciating detail here, we have printf again. We've seen that up here. This time we're giving it an actual format string instead of just a regular string to output. So we have %d is negative. That %d is going to be replaced with the value of input converted to a string. So whatever is in input, it's going to get put back out onto the screen, followed by is negative, and then a line break. Else, if input is greater than 0, well, we just need to do something similar there. Printf %d is positive. Put. Else. This is our last case here, so this will only fire if input is equal to 0. So, printf 0 is neither positive nor negative. And there we go. This should work. Let's find out. Let's see here. I'm going to clear. What did I name this? Project1.c. Okay, cool. This is, I'm pretty familiar with operating on a terminal, You don't necessarily have to, especially if you're using an IDE like Visual Studio. If you're curious, this ls just lists every file in my current directory, which right now I have it set to where I'm storing this file. So let's clear that again. GCC project 1.c. It would help if I could type -o project 1.exe. The compiler didn't say anything, which means everything is working just fine. For programs like GCC, getting no output is a good thing. That means whatever it did it successfully and quietly. So now we're just going to run project1.exe. Please input an integer. Cool, that's about what we expected. Let's start with 5. 5 is positive. Good to know. We're going to try this again. This time I'm going to try -78. -78 is negative. One more time with 0. That works the way we expect it to. And now, just for grins, we're going to try something weird. Let's say 999. And you'll see we ran up against the limit of the integer data type here, but other than that, it still works. So an integer can't store a value that's greater than this, but even under these circumstances, it still worked the way we expected it to. Last thing before I go is I'm going to try giving it something particularly weird. So, project C. Let's try giving it something that isn't even a number. Let's try just a random string of characters from my number pad. Cool. Under those circumstances, scanf fails to do anything of import, and then we just use the 0 that's loaded into input by default. Good to know. Cool. The source code that I've written here will be available on the website for you to study and play with and tinker with on your own time. Thank you for joining us. Hope you had fun doing this.